Welcome back to Open Line. It is the night to ask your questions of the mayor. Also, Bob Tuke is in with Operation Stand Down Tennessee as we continue to celebrate our veterans. If you're a veteran who is having some trouble getting things to go correctly, whether it's with your VA benefits, whether it's finding a job, housing, go ahead and give us a call. Bob can point you in the right direction. That's what he does all day. The mayor's here also to take a variety of your calls, a variety of your questions. You did want to respond to Tim calling in and saying, why always the push for college? We don't necessarily need that.
Well, so in our high schools here, we have an academy program where we're trying to align individuals, our students' desire to work in a particular field with those kind of opportunities. And so some of those are what I guess you would call typically vocational. But many of the vocations now require you to have more education than you can get in high school. And so that's why we do encourage as many of our students as we possibly can to go through at least an associate's degree program. And it doesn't mean that we're putting people through a program that's like a typical liberal arts education. It's very practical, and it gets our students ready to go out in the workforce where there are jobs available. But a lot of those jobs right now do actually require something beyond just a high school degree. And information technology is sort of the easy one to point to, where there are a lot of really good jobs out there that don't require a bachelor's degree necessarily, but really do require something beyond just high school.
Very specific training.
It is. And so that's why the Nashville State is so important to our community. You can go for free. So the risk to a student is not that significant in terms of walking out with a bunch of debt. But you can walk out with the ability to go earn in your lifetime, on average, a third more than you would earn if you just had a high school diploma. And so I think we've got to, I think the trades are important, and we're going to have a lot of people in our community who are going to really thrive with that kind of career, and I encourage that. But we also need to focus on the fact that there are a lot of new jobs in our culture that require more than just that high school diploma.
Let's go to Brian, who is waiting on the line. Hi, Brian. What's your question tonight?
Hey, two questions. The first one is for Operation Stand Down. Now that it seems like we've wound down most of the wars that we shouldn't have been in the Middle East in the first place, do you think that everything happens about 10 years later? We're getting all the effects of Iraq and Afghanistan now. And now that we're no longer the world's policemen, do you think that in the future that Operation Stand Down it'll always be needed, but do you think it may not be as prevalent as it is today? Second thing is for the mayor. Now, I've been pushing for, you know me, Brian, you've probably heard me in a couple of talk shows about tax increment financing, how I've been pushing for the elimination of that since what year is this, 2018? Since about 2014, I've been really pushing for that. And I predicted about 2 years ago that this would happen. Now, I know that the guy retired, one of the head finance guys of the city, or he just left and stuff. So we're finally going to have these people pay their fair share. We'll be able to get the city's budget in order because of this. We really don't need to attract any more business to the city. We've got plenty. Let's fix the infrastructure, fix the roads. I know that most of the roads are state roads, but there's some that the city can fix too.
All right, let's get those answers. I'm going to put you on hold, so listen to your TV, Brian. Let's start where he left off. Oh, you want to do Bob first?
You want to go first?
Well, okay, we'll start with Bob. We'll start with Bob. You pass the baton there.
It's a good question, and so we're staying very flexible at Operation Stand Down Tennessee to make sure that whatever the needs of the veterans are as they evolve, we're ready to help. For example, we're helping a lot more women now. Because more women wound up going into the armed forces and now are getting out, and of course their needs are going to be different. A lot of times they're moms, and I love moms because they do take a bigger role in raising the kids than we dads do. We try hard, but they're better. So we
thanks, Bob.
It happens to be true, and so we try to stay flexible. We want to make sure that we're providing the kinds of services that veterans in the changing world need. And I might add, what everybody should do is write this down. The telephone number for Operation Stand Down is 615-248-1981. I'm just a director. But the executive director, the guy who really runs it, chief executive officer, is John Crenson, and he's a fabulous guy, and he's got a wonderful staff. And the website is www.osdtn.org.
Okay.
Write it down.
We'll get Taylor working busy in the back, and we'll make sure we show those before we leave.
Right.
So if you grab your pen and paper, we'll show those before this hour is over. Now I'm going to put the mayor in the hot seat, talking about TIF, tax increment financing. Kind of been a hot potato for a while now.
So the basic explanation for tax increment financing is that the city would allow the owner of a building, who's building a new building, to pay a little bit less in property taxes for a period of time, and they could use that money for the construction of their building. And when it started out, we used it because downtown was seeing no development, and it was meant to be spent in blighted areas. And we did that for a period of time, and it worked. So we have a lot of buildings downtown that probably would not have been built but for the use of TIF. Well, we probably don't need to use it for that anymore. And so right now the city is in the midst of a study to look at how we've used tax increment financing in the past, to look at what its benefits are, what its risks are, and to identify when it might need to be used in the future. So certainly we don't need to use it for what we used it for before, but it's possibly going to be one of the best tools we can use for the construction of affordable housing. And so we can't totally take it off the list of things that we want to use as a tool, because we may need to use TIF for the construction of affordable housing. We may need to use TIF for the construction of some transit infrastructure that we're going to need. And so I think what the city needs to do is look closely at when we're going to use it and have a clearer policy about when it makes sense, as opposed to just saying we'll never ever use it again.
Sure.
It is a way for us to lower somebody's taxes. And I know on the surface that might not seem fair, but if we have a public policy that we're pursuing, and it makes sense to do it in that context, I think we need to keep that tool in our toolbox instead of just saying we'll never ever do it again.
Is there discussion on how much should be limited? Because as you have probably seen, Ben Hall has done a series of wonderful reports that explain this and very clearly show when it comes to the Batman building or whatever building it is, they're 75% break, or I mean, it's crazy, and that money is essentially being taken from schools, being taken from our first responders. I mean, it's money that the city is not getting to put elsewhere.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes and no. So a lot of the buildings would not have been built if we have not used tax increment financing. So we would have gotten zero in new revenue. That's fair. So if we got zero in new revenue, we're not taking anything away by letting a builder use TIF in certain instances. Now, we do have to look at it closely, and there are going to be instances I think we'll look back and say, okay, well, we did too much, or we should have cut it off here or there. But the basic idea behind TIF is that but for its use, you wouldn't have gotten anything. And so it's complicated, I understand, and it seems more questionable than it really is. I think what we really got to focus on is transparency, making sure people see what we're doing and understanding it. And I think once we do that, if we're clear about it, I think people will understand when we use it in the future. There's nothing on the horizon right now for it to be used. Since I've been mayor, we haven't approved anything, and before we do, we will look at it very closely to make sure that it makes sense for the city. And you said a study was being done right now. When do you expect hard results to come in? Oh, I know it was a resolution adopted by the council, and we have 5 members on the committee, I believe. I'm not sure what the deadline is, but I think it's early. It's before the end of this term, so I think it's in the spring when it will be done. All right, it's going to be a busy spring. It is going to be a busy spring. It is going to be a busy spring. All right, thank you, Mayor. Sure. We're going to take another quick break. More to come.